Here we are again. It's been a while, but Ask Paul Kirtley is back. This is episode 82. Welcome to episode 82 of Ask Paul Kirtley, and it's good to be back doing this question and answer series. And I'll talk at the end about how you get your answer, or at least your question, and hopefully my answer, featured on this show. But let's get into the questions. I've got some lined up here already. First one.
Hello, I just want to say I love your work very much. And my question is, will you ever write a book? Do you plan to write a book sometime in the future? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and that was via the SpeakPipe voice recorder on my site, and that was from Paul. Not me, by the way. I'm not leaving myself messages, particularly not given the subjects. Now, I feel like recently, as I record this in August 2021, like I've been banging on about my book for months and months and months. And to be fair to Paul that left that message, that was recorded back I think about 6 to 8 months ago. Okay, I have not done an Ask Paul Kirtley since October 2020, and one of the reasons has been COVID, of course. That's caused all sorts of strains, and actually I talked about that on the last Ask Paul Kirtley, and I'm not going to go back into that. I think everybody's pretty much sick of hearing about COVID and lockdowns and restrictions. But one of the other things that's been going on with me is my book, Wilderness Axe Skills and Campcraft, which came out in May in North America and June in pretty much the rest of the world, including the UK, which is where I'm based. So I'm very proud of this. It's very nice in terms of its production value. It's a hardback. It's very well printed on very good quality paper, lots of nice images, or at least, you know, they've done a good job of presenting my images well. Most of the images in the book, most of the photographs are photos that I've taken, and then the rest are ones that people who work with me, or some students, but largely people who are on courses with me or trips with me who have taken them. Ray Goodwin took some of the photos in there as well, because of course we've done plenty of canoe trips. So yes, I have been writing a book, and so it's a little bit unfair to Paul because I've ramped up the promotion of this in recent months, but it's not like this has not been on the cards for some time. I was first approached about writing this in 2017. It was around about the time I was doing a trip on the French River, and I'd also done a trip on the Mississippi with clients, with students, if you like. So I remember where I was, because it was one of those situations where I'm traveling, I've only got my phone to deal with emails, and I'm trying not to be on my phone much because I'm in some beautiful places, and it was just a day in between trips. And there was this email inquiring as to whether or not I'd be interested in writing a book based on my Woodcrafter course. Now, this book has ended up being somewhat different to the syllabus of the Woodcrafter, but I think in a good way. And it brings in elements that we, you know, if you're in the woods for a week, and I say this about my online courses, if you're in the woods for a week on a field course, there's certain things which you can delve deeply into, a lot of detail, you can get coaching from the instructors, etc., etc. But clearly you are bounded by being in that 1 week. If you're here in the summer, you can't suddenly then look at some winter skills, and vice versa. So one of the great things about recorded material, whether it's video courses or whether it's books, is that you can bring a whole host of things in and look at different aspects of the same skill sets. And so I'm very pleased that we've managed to do that with this book. And it was literally about a 3-year project putting this together, based on having about 10 years worth of photographs. So there's 6 chapters in here, just for those of you that are interested, and I know some of you have already got it, but people keep asking me about the book. that's just an example, that audio question. So I thought I would mention it. I think many of the people who listen to this or watch this on YouTube would be interested in the book. It'd be right up your street. 6 big chapters, selecting the correct tools for the job, caring for your tools, everyday axe techniques, felling, limbing and sectioning, carving techniques and projects, and the 6th one is woodland campcraft, which again is a big chapter, 50 pages on woodland campcraft towards the end. And to be honest with you, there's even more that I would have liked to have got into the book just on woodland campcraft, but of course I had 208 pages and I had to cram as much in there as possible. We got 45,000 words, 640 photographs. There's a lot of material, there's a lot of information here, there's a lot of detail, lots of step-by-step sequences, whether it's things like sharpening your tools. So we do have some knife work, even though it's wilderness axe skills, but the campcraft of course requires you to use a knife, and the knife work in the book is really supportive of the wider scheme of the book. We've got things on sharpening curved tools like spoon knives and whatnot in there as well. I say we because of course nobody writes a book on their own. There was a designer, there were 2 editors involved in terms of just sharpening up my language. Not that my writing is bad, but it's always good. Two sets of eyes are better than one. Some of that you might be familiar with from my blog, because some of the material is based on material I wrote from my blog, and many people wished to see some of that as a book. You know, it was one of the reasons people asked me about whether or not I'll write a book, because there's so much material on my site. Putting that into a nice little package of a book is something that many people have looked for. So again, you know, we've got sequences that I've taken, but then we've also got photos from trips in Sweden, canoe trips in the Lake District, in the UK. There's lots and lots of stuff in here. So there's lots of good instructional stuff, lots of good instructional material, but then there's also some contextual photographs from trips and camps and whatnot as well. A few knots and other bits of useful additional material at the end, lots of pot hangers and cranes and things that will basically get you by in pretty much any situation you find yourself, whatever type of terrain you're in, as long as you've got access to some wood, making some camp furniture, etc. So lots and lots in there. I crammed as much in there as possible. It's published by Schiffer Publishing. It's a US publishing house. It's available all over the world, certainly in North America. I know there's quite a lot of people who listen and watch in the US and Canada. Yes, you can get that book locally. You'll be able to find it on Amazon, of course, but other local bookstores will sell it. Also available in the UK and Europe, Australia, many other parts of the world. It's even on Amazon Japan. Also, I sell the book directly at wildernessaxeskills.com. wildernessaxeskills.com. I sell the book directly at just the cover price, which is £24.99, and if you order directly from me, you'll get a signed copy, as long as you're willing to pay for the shipping wherever you are in the world, including you can get tracked shipping or just economy shipping or whatever you want. Economy shipping in some places, not others, but you can get tracked shipping anywhere in the world. Tracked insured shipping. I'll package it up nicely, I'll write something in there for you. I'll certainly sign it, but if you want me to write an inscription in there, you can put that in the order form when you order. So that's my book, available everywhere. There were 5,000 copies printed initially. They have been selling pretty fast. We are talking about doing a reprint, so if you're thinking about getting it, I'm not trying to sort of bum rush you into buying it, but if you're thinking about getting it, get one when you see one, because we are going to need to reprint it, I think, fairly soon, and hopefully that doesn't cause delays, but that's up to the publisher as well. It's not me that's financing that, that's the publisher that finances that stuff, so that's a publisher's decision. I've got a reasonable stock of books at the moment. If you want one, you can get one from me, or jump into your local bookstore, ask them if they can order it. I'll put the ISBN in the description below, as well as links to some of the Amazon shops, and as well as a link to my site that's dedicated to this. And you can read reviews of it there as well. There's lots of reader reviews, as well as some reviews that other people have done online of the book. So don't take my word for it that it's good. You can see other people's words as well there. So thanks for the questions about the books. Hopefully now more people know about the book. I do feel like I've been banging on about it for a while. Not as much as Ray Goodwin perhaps talks about his book, but those of you that know Ray will know what I'm talking about. Although, to be fair to Ray, I did an event with Ray, a course with Ray earlier in the year, and he forgot to bring any books with him, and there were students there who wanted them. So, you know, we always try and supply them to people. It's nice for people to get them directly and have a signed copy. But yeah, it's widely available. And am I going to write any more books is probably the next question. Possibly. This took a long time to gestate. The economics of writing niche books like this, as nicely produced as it is, I'm not selling, you know, hundreds of thousands of these. I'm not like Dan Brown or somebody. I can't make a living from writing books, so it has to be something that augments other things that I do. But I do have some things that I would like to put into book format as well, that I think, some of the bits on my blog, of course, on my site at paulkirtley.co.uk, but also there's some other ideas that I've got that I've been thinking about for many years that I would like to put into a book, because there's a few things that I didn't have when I was coming up and learning many of the bushcraft skills and bits of knowledge, and there's a few areas where I think actually a book on that combined this and this and this, aimed at people who are interested in bushcraft and survival, would be very useful. So I've got a few ideas like that. Who knows, maybe in 5 years time I'll be talking about book number 2. But anyway, thanks for your interest. Thanks for everyone who's bought it so far. Shameless book plug. I did mention it on some of my axe videos recently, like axe sharpening, and I said, well, I don't normally sell things on my YouTube channel very often. There are a few people said, well, actually you should promote your stuff more, because you give away so much stuff for free. You should occasionally, the things that you do have to sell, you should push them a bit more. Okay, so I'm pushing my book there. Buy it, it's good. And it makes a nice Christmas present for other people who haven't got it as well, if you've already got one. All right. Next one. I know that was a bit self-indulgent, but hey, I can only do that once every 4 or 5 years. Okay, what else have we got here? Another audio question. This one is from Peter.
Hi Paul, thank you for all the work you do. My question relates to Swedish fire sticks. I've collected many over the years, and there are some I simply cannot get any fire spark off or whatsoever. I've watched numerous videos, particularly yours, and whatever I do, whatever I try to do, there is no spark I can generate off some of the sticks. Where there's one called Light My Fire, I think, and it's just beautiful. It generates sparks. I'd be interested to know whether, if I gave you the ones I can't get to light, you would be able to get them to fire up. Or is it something I'm doing fundamentally wrong? The name is Peter Budden, Budden.
All right, Peter, that's a good question, and it's a question that is one that crops up fairly commonly, particularly in the context of students having different varieties of fire steels on their person when they come on courses. And it's not necessarily something we ask people to do, but these days people tend to often have their own already. You mentioned Light My Fire, and that's one of the makes that I prefer personally. Strike Fire is another one, which is a British brand, and they are similarly effective, I find, as the Light My Fires. Now, some people will say they prefer a softer ferro rod or Swedish fire steel. Personally, I prefer them that are a bit harder, and by a bit harder I mean, case in point, Strike Fire or Light My Fire. That's what I think works best for me. The softer ones I find harder to get sparks from. Some people would say that they prefer that. Personally, in my experience, both of me using them as well as students using them, I would say generally people find them harder to use. And it will largely be down to the composition of the steel, the fire steel that you've got, that's causing you the problem, particularly if you've watched my video and other people's videos about how to use them. I mean, it's not that complicated to use them. So if you're finding it hard to create sparks from them, it's unlikely to be something that you're doing. Particularly if you can get sparks off ones and not the others. The difference there is the different types of steel, right? Your technique's working on ones that work. The other thing that can cause a problem, though, and can be a bit of a spanner in in the works is if you're using one that works very well with the proprietary striker that comes with it, and then you're using one that doesn't work very well with that proprietary striker that comes with it, it can sometimes be the striker that's not very good if it doesn't have enough of a burr or a nice right angle on it that will catch and bite into the ferro rod. That can cause it to not work very well. So do try, like if you've got a, your Light My Fire, for example, and the striker that works with that, if you're using a striker or your knife, whatever you're using to create good sparks, try that. If it's not what you're trying, try it with the ones that don't work very well, because it could be the striker, but I would say more often than not it's the composition and the softness or hardness of the ferro rod. And I find that the cheap Chinese, if you like, because a lot of them are made in China, a lot of the cheap ones don't work very well. That's no denigration to Chinese manufacturing. My book's printed in China. iPhones are made in China. There's lots of stuff that's very well made in China, but I find some of the cheap ferro rods just don't work very well, and I would agree. So what else would I say about that? I'm sort of just running through my mind there some sort of pictures, some recall of students struggling. Sometimes the smaller ones, like the Scout models, are a bit more fiddly to use because they're a narrower diameter. They've got a sharper radius curve, if you like. It's harder to get a good purchase on them because they curve away more sharply from the steel, that your steel striker. That can sometimes cause people to struggle. Personally, I don't like the little Scout models, the thinner, smaller models that Light My Fire make and other people make. I like the full-size so-called army model. Now, some people really like the big kind of truncheon-sized ones. I know Pathfinder School, Dave Canterbury School sells some. Other people sell them. You can buy them, and some of those are made from really good material. You'll get some really great sparks off them. Nice, similarly good sparks that you get off the ones that I like. The Light My Fire and the Strike Fire. Similar hardness. I don't own any of those personally. Actually, I own one. Student left it on a course, and it actually fell out in one of our vehicles. We don't know whose it was. It fell out of their kit, and nobody ever claimed it. So we've got one in our kit somewhere, but I don't personally use them because I find them a bit heavy and clunky for my pocket. I like one in my pocket all the time, and a lot of my kit is set up, even though I'm teaching in the woods a fair amount, a lot of my kit, the way that it's set up and the way that I just use it, even if I'm in a static camp for a week, is as if I'm on a trip, right? So a lot of my personal equipment is just set up as it is for when I trip. I just use the same system. So I find them too heavy for hiking. I find them too clunky, the bigger ones, for canoeing. That's not to say they aren't a valuable thing to have in a survival kit or whatnot, in a vehicle or wherever, but for me personally, I find the army models, like the original model, to be the best, and the two that we've mentioned are, for me, the best ones that work consistently and last a long time. I'm using them quite a lot for just living in the woods as well as teaching, doing trips, etc., etc. And so yeah, I would say it isn't what you're doing. Check that it's not the striker. The striker can make a big difference even with a good ferro rod, but generally the make or break thing is the ferro rod or the fire steel. All right, next question. So this is a question from Instagram, and this is from Wandering Woodsman, Trev Carter. And he says, hoping this gets to you as for some reason unable to comment on YouTube. Yes is the answer to the question of bringing back Ask Paul Kirtley. So this is from a little while ago, around the time I was asking whether or not I should bring it back. And then of course I recorded one, and then I haven't done one since. So there were more questions than I could answer in the previous one, which is why there's some left. But I think this question is still a very valid one. Although you answer questions from viewers and watchers, you also highlight the philosophy of bushcraft and what bushcraft actually is, i.e. not kit, tools, etc., but the understanding and knowledge of nature and how to use it. Since listening to your videos and podcasts, my understanding of philosophy have completely changed regarding bushcraft. My question to you would be, since beginning your bushcraft and outdoorsman journey in your adult life, has your philosophy towards the subject changed? Many thanks for all that you put out there, etc. Thank you, Trev. So, has my bushcraft philosophy, or my philosophy towards the subject, changed? I feel like my understanding of the subject has deepened. I know that's not answering your question. So I think almost certainly it has changed. Whether or not I can enunciate what that change has been, I don't know. I think at times I've been influenced by others in terms of how to think, how to frame the subject, how to think about the subject, how to think about teaching the subject. And certainly in my earlier days of being on the teaching side, of course I was working with some pretty strong characters, and you pick up on how they want you to do it, what they want you to do, what they don't want you to do, what they want you to emphasize, etc. But over time you develop your own experience. You develop your own experience with teaching, you develop your own experience with spending time out in nature on your own, you spend time journeying, having experiences, good and bad, tough times, great times, you know, horrible, grotty, rainy, cold days, and beautiful sunsets and wonderful evenings and peace and all of those things. So you have that whole mix of experience, and in amongst that you have your interactions with the natural world, both in terms of visual and oral, but also particularly in the context of bushcraft. We're talking about, you know, that kind of kinesthetic kind of making and doing and using and touching things, and I think the more you get into it, the deeper you are kind of raveled in with all of that, and the more it's got its roots in you. And so I would say almost certainly compared to now, 20 years ago when I was first embarking on getting involved, moving more towards the teaching side as well, starting to, I would say back then my understanding and therefore my philosophy was more superficial than it is now, because I've continued to grow and learn. Many people talk about, oh, you know, he used to work with so-and-so, he used to work with this person, and yeah, you know, credit where credit's due. I worked with some great people and some very knowledgeable people and some big names in the bushcraft world, but I've been doing my own thing for a long time now. I've been doing my own thing for a lot longer than I worked with any of those mentors that I had in my early days, and I think they set me right in many respects, and some of those philosophies still underpin, but then I've built my whole own ethos on top of that. And I think I've grown to be more accepting of other opinions and other approaches. I think I've learned to be more flexible. I think I've learned to be more comfortable about what I do and don't know. And I think the other thing, while my thing is centered on, at its core, skills for really wild places, that to me was what drew me to bushcraft in the first place, and it's still what centers. It's almost like a touch point, and this might sound like a bit of a criticism, but I do see in certain areas, and I'm not trying to single anybody out here, I'm genuinely not, but I see certain things where they overcomplicate things, or they add so many layers of safety around things that work if you're in your backyard or in a scout camp or what have you, but just don't work in the context of you've just rocked up at a place you don't know on a hike or a canoe trip or what have you, and you have to do things, you have to make them work, you have to get camp set up or split wood or whatever it is. There's a certain way that you have to do things to be effective and to get things done in a certain period of time while still being as safe as possible, that informs how I do things even when I'm not in those situations. I don't kind of then, I have a less of a tendency to kind of get distracted and pulled away in tangential directions or differential directions that are very situation dependent. The other thing as well, again, is I try and make sure that I teach in places where I can teach the skills in the way that I want to teach them, or the way that they should be taught, or the way that I was taught them. Because again, what I don't want to do, and I've seen it a few times, is people working in very constrained areas, either quite small pieces of land, or that they're very limited in the range of species that are available there, for example. And that means then if they want to teach a particular skill, they've got to go and find a suboptimal piece of wood, for example, material, fiber for cordage or whatever it is, that isn't really what you would use to make that thing. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, you want to be able to apply your skills in the many different ways as possible, and equally you don't want to be stumped by saying, I've only ever lit my fire with birch bark and sparks onto birch bark, and therefore I must find birch bark, otherwise I can't light a fire. And I've seen students do that. I've seen students walk past perfectly good materials for lighting fires in search of birch bark, for example. And I think that's some of the way that your thinking has to evolve, is being open to what's available. And I think for me, I like to have places to teach where I can teach, say example, making withies, twisting up fibrous osiers, fibrous stems and saplings and shoots, and willow and hazel work really well for this, of course. And those are the ones that I want to take students to and say, okay, we're going to make withies with this. But then, of course, we're going to experiment with some other materials, like how does birch work? How does sweet chestnut work? How does ash work? Not that I would typically use. A sycamore would be a better example. Can we withy up some sycamore saplings? Because they come up like weeds where they come up. And so you've got the grounding in the core skill of something that actually okay, this works. A little bit like the question with firesteels. It's like, well, if you know that it's your technique's working on one that is good, if it's not working on another one, then it's probably not your technique that's the problem. And it's the same with bow drill. I try and get people to work on their technique with one material first, but one that we know is consistently good, and also one that people can find widely, like alder or willow. It's not necessarily the easiest. People go, ivy is fantastic. But then how often do you find dead ivy in the right condition when you want to make a bow drill set? It's less likely. Particularly in some parts of the world, you just don't find ivy at all, but you will find willow and you will find alder, and then of course you'll find birch and spruce and pine. And so my point is that get your technique good, and this is a philosophy I apply to myself as well as to students. Get your technique good with something that you know works, either from your own experience or from other people's experience who you trust, and then try other things. And so I like to teach in places where I can teach the core material in the way that I want to teach it, in the way that I feel it should be taught, but then also have the breadth of materials for people to try other things and work with other materials as well. And I think as soon as you move away from that, you start distorting the core of the sort of foundation of the way that you're teaching the subject. And so for me, that's really important, and that's become more important, I think, the more I've taught over the years. And I think the flip side of that is I think you need to be also extremely flexible in your application, and that requires you to train with lots of different materials. Try different roots for bindings, try different fibres for cordage, try different woods for bow drill, etc, etc, etc. So that when you do go to somewhere, when you're journeying, and that can just be wandering through a landscape on any particular day, or it could be making a 2-week canoe trip in Canada and you're on a portage or you're in camp or what have you, you're able to, rather than fixate on in a task-oriented way, which is a very sort of Western business work-oriented way of thinking, to kind of go, right, I want to achieve A, therefore I know I need B and C, and I must now go and find those. It's kind of the way that guys go shopping, right? It's like, I know I need this, this, and this. I'm going to go in a shop. I can get that, and I'm gone. And there are some times when that's absolutely what you need. But there are other times when you need to be open to what's available and be flexible in how you combine and apply things, and that comes down to your practice before you get into that situation. And so I think, to me as well, that's, as my experience has grown, both in terms of journeying as well as teaching and getting that feedback from students of what's been useful, and them coming back on more courses and what they want to learn next and what was useful from previous courses, that's kind of deepened my understanding of what's at that core and what it should be. So absolutely, you know, I haven't talked a lot about tools there, but yeah, tool use is important. I've written a whole book pretty much on tool use and wood and materials there, right? And I think that's one thing, if we need one thing to differentiate bushcraft. I don't like calling bushcraft an outdoor activity. I think it's deeper than that, and that's part of my philosophy. I think it's like the mycelium of the fungi in the forest. Yeah, it's just there in amongst everything, and for me, the bushcraft is there in amongst everything that I do outdoors. It's not like something that I separate, like mountain biking or even canoeing. Like, I'm not always canoeing. Yeah, I am when I'm in a canoe, but I'm not always canoeing. It's made me look at water in a different way. Even when I'm hiking and I come to a river or I come to a body of water, my view of that water is different to how it would have been before, because I have more experience of water and seeing the world from the perspective of the water and interacting with the water. But, you know, I'm cycling or four-wheel driving or shooting or whatever, you know, on a range. That's more of a contained activity. Excuse me. Whereas for me, bushcraft goes deeper than that. It has its tendrils in everything pretty much all the time. I find it hard to switch off noticing the plants and the trees and the resources and the fungi and the animal tracks, etc., etc. So that's kind of part of my underlying philosophy, and I think that's become stronger over the years. That realization that it's that integral to my perception of the world, and it's also very stark when I go to places that I'm not so familiar with. So in recent years, not so much in the last 18-24 months, but in recent years I've been to Australia quite a few times. I've got some family connections in Australia, and it was a place that I'd not really spent much time before. And when I first went there, even though I feel very comfortable here in the woods in the UK and pretty much in the northern temperate, put me into, you know, boreal in Canada, boreal in northern Scandinavia, I know those places, I know the species there, I know the environments pretty well in terms of what are the common widespread species, what can we do with them, what can we not do with them, etc. What we're likely to find where in what types of terrain, habitats. Because I've spent quite a lot of time there, then I go to somewhere like Australia, and you go to the woods there, go to the bush or the forest, you know, eucalyptus forest or what have you, and you just feel like a complete baby because you don't recognize very much at all. And then you're starting to relearn, but I find that really thrilling to go up that, because you learn a lot quite quickly when you don't know very much, and that's quite thrilling. But again, that makes me realize how integral the knowledge of nature and the bushcraft is to my world, and that's just become stronger over the years for sure. So people say I'm more relaxed than I used to be. People say that I'm more forgiving than I used to be. I think that's partly some of the people that I spend time with now as opposed to some of the people I spent time with in the past. I think that also comes with maturity. I think it comes with being comfortable in your own skin. I think it also, you know, being comfortable in your own skin, you know, doing this sort of thing. If I look at videos I made 8-9 years ago, I'm so wooden, and I don't want to give anything away, and also I'm very guarded, I'm very wooden, and I think I'm more open now, and I'm more open to criticism. You have to be if you put stuff on YouTube, but I think that's a healthy thing. and I think how you react to it. And yeah, okay, I'm going to get annoyed sometimes. People say stupid stuff, people say ignorant things, people say things without thinking about it much. You know, I spend a lot of my time thinking about this material, thinking about bushcraft, thinking about how to present it, thinking about how to teach it, what's important, what's not important, and talking with other people that have also got good experience and whose experience you respect and whose intelligence you respect. And then you get some person who comes along and just makes some ignorant comments, and on a good day I'm kind of accepting, and I'm like, okay, well, this person's coming from that perspective, and okay, let's see if we can help. But equally, I'm not here to change everybody's mind, and there are certain things that, you know, are pretty much universal truths, like, you know, hypothermia or firelighting or lots of things, like they either work or they don't. You either succumb to hypothermia or you don't. You get your fire going or you don't, and it's like, it's not down to someone's opinion or your rational thinking about, you know, oh, you know, I shouldn't have got hypothermia because I had my jumper on. It doesn't matter. It's just the physics of the situation, yeah. And it's the same with YouTube. You know, some comments are worthwhile and they're valid, and different perspectives are important and they're flexible, and we should be flexible around thinking about that. Other things are just like, well, that's the way it is, you know. And I think I've learned better where to draw that line, in terms of whether to be, you know, argumentative and adamant about something, or otherwise just to go, yeah, whatever you want to do. I think that's important to know where those boundaries are, and that's important for people who trust your judgment as well. So some of that was more about me than the philosophy, but I think it's so intertwined. You know, one of the things that's come out for me as well is that I think there's a lot of stuff bandied around under the banner of environmentalism that doesn't make sense from the perspective that you gain through bushcraft, and I'm not going to go down that route right now. And then there are other things about the modern world which are clearly, you know, very much in line with more of an environmental perspective, an environmentalist perspective, and also I think nature's complicated, it's complex, and the world is complex, and I think one of the things you get through bushcraft is an understanding of that, or at least an intuitive understanding of that. You're not necessarily able to analyze it, but I think increasingly people want simple solutions to everything. Like, how do I not get wet? You know, I look at some of the questions that I get, and some of them I don't answer because you can't answer them. It's like, how do I not get wet? It's like, well, stay indoors. You know, it's like if you go outside, you're going to get wet. You know, sometimes people want to make things too simple, or they just want, you know, a great example, and I've probably mentioned it before, Cliff Jacobson, who's been on my podcast. I saw him in an interview years ago, and he was commenting similarly. You know, people ask him, you know, what happened? You know, what do I do if I fall in the middle of a big lake in, you know, in spring when the water's cold? And his answer is, you die. Like, that's what happens. You know, it's highly likely. So you make sure you don't fall in. That's the answer. The answer isn't what do I do when I fall in. The answer is, how do I make sure I don't fall in? And so I think one of the problems with the modern world is, it sounds like an old git here, but one of the things that I see quite a lot is people wanting to somehow rationalize and mitigate all risk. You can't do that. You can't do that at home. You can't do that when you're driving a vehicle. You can't do that when you are out in nature. There are risks there, and you can mitigate them to an extent, but you can't remove them entirely. And the more experienced you are with certain risks, then the better you are able to judge where the boundaries are. But there aren't simple answers. You can't suddenly go, oh yeah, right, okay, that problem's gone away. It's like, again, bugs is one. You know, bugs is one that bugs me. People go, oh, you know, how do you deal with bugs? It's like, well, they bite you sometimes. Yeah, it's like, if I go to the woods even here in the UK, which is not particularly bug ridden by, you know, some people will tell you it is. Okay, the west coast of Scotland, horrible sometimes. Parts of Wales, you know, I've lived in Wales, midges there can, you know, gnats can be quite annoying. Midges in Scotland can be highly irritating. But generally in terms of the bugs, yes, ticks are increasing and Lyme disease is a bit of an increasing concern. But it's not that, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you know, again, it just displays how urbanized everybody's become, that it's like, oh, you know, how do I avoid getting bitten at all by a midge? How do I avoid getting bitten at all by a mosquito? It's very hard not to ever get bitten by anything. I mean, there are things you can do. Not wearing shorts, tucking your trousers into your socks, you know, long sleeve shirts. Yes, okay, some places you want to wear a bug suit or bug net, etc. But are you never going to get bitten by anything ever if you spend a lot of time outside? No. And it's similar again, you know, go back to Australia. There are things you don't do. Like there's a wood pile over there, right? Here I have no issue with just going and pulling wood off that wood pile. Would I do that in a similar situation in Australia? No, because there are things there that if they do bite me, they're going to cause me much more issue than anything that's in there. And so again, it's like, it's not how do I avoid getting wood off the wood pile, it's just, okay, how do I mitigate that risk? And yes, okay, I don't want to get bitten by a redback or whatever in, you know, taking stuff off the, you know, off the wood pile, you know, little spider that's related to the black widow spider, it has a red hourglass on the back. I don't want to get bitten by one of those. So you wear leather gloves or what have you when you're taking your wood off the wood pile in the backyard or in the woods. Whereas I don't worry about doing that here, and similarly I don't worry too much about getting bitten by a mosquito here, because I'm not going to get malaria, I'm not going to get West Nile virus. There's nothing really that's going to bother me. So it's itchy, yeah, but I don't get too bothered. But again, people will still write to me and ask me questions of how do I avoid getting bitten by mosquitoes when I go camping in the UK, and it's the wrong question. It's like, what are the benefits of going to the woods? Okay, you might occasionally get bitten by a mosquito, but you know, put some bug repellent on that isn't damaging to you. You know, again, you know, people worry about the wrong things. You know, spraying yourself with extremely harsh chemicals is probably worse than getting bitten by a mosquito in the UK. Might not be in some malarial ridden parts of the world, but you know, again, it's like understanding the complexities and the nuances. So that's what I'm getting at. It's like there isn't a simple answer for everything all the time, and yet people want it. And so I think one of the things people say I talk too much on these shows, but there's so much that I could say about some of these things, because there's a lot of nuance, and the more experience you get, yes, okay, sometimes you can generalize things down to simple rules and rules of thumb, and that's where we can help provide value in these type of pieces of content. But also it's incumbent on us to say, okay, well actually this is quite complex, it's quite nuanced, and it depends where you are, depends what you're doing, it depends what your experience level is. All of those things, it's this multi-dimensional matrix of different parameters that, you know, that kind of constrain the answer that you're coming to, and it's not always that simple, even if certain parts of it can be simple. And so I think one of the things that comes out of spending a lot of time out in the woods, spending a lot of time out in nature, is that you get an intuitive understanding of these certain things. What can you do here, what can you not do there, based on your experience. But equally you also understand that life's not that simple, and I'll do my best to answer the questions on these shows, but the answers aren't always straightforward, and the answer might not even be always what you want, but you know, that's I guess why you're asking the question. So anyway, I'm not sure that answered the question fully, but that's the best answer I can come up with at the moment, and thank you for that. I like the range of questions that we're getting at the moment that are coming in, and keep asking them. Instagram and Twitter with the hashtag #AskPaulKirtley. The voicemail system on my blog, just go to Ask Paul Kirtley on my blog, you'll find your way. SpeakPipe, just record, speak, it will record. And you can email me as well, as long as you make it clear that it's an Ask Paul Kirtley question. So put Ask Paul Kirtley in there somewhere, because basically what happens if you don't is that you send me the question, I'll look at it and go, oh, that's quite a good question, and then when I come to actually search on my emails to find the questions, unless it's got Ask Paul Kirtley in there, it'll not come up in the search. Yes, I could have a folder for them, and I do try and do that, but still it's easier for me to find them as and when. I get a lot of emails about all sorts of things, so the more you make it apparent it's an Ask Paul Kirtley question. And so those are the ways you can ask questions. I've got more of these coming out very soon. I have amassed a fair few questions in recent weeks and months because I haven't done any of these shows for a while, but the fact that I've been out teaching again, I've been writing a book, etc., that's been taking my time, but also because I've been out teaching again, and because I haven't done the Ask Paul Kirtleys for a while, or the Paul Kirtley podcasts, people have been telling me that they miss them. People have been telling me that they've been re-listening to them during lockdowns. People have been telling me that they've found them hugely valuable, and it's the stuff that people tell me but that they're missing when I don't do it that I'm going to continue doing. So Ask Paul Kirtleys are definitely back, and it isn't just the occasional one. They'll be back on a regular basis. The Paul Kirtley podcast will be back on a regular basis. I just put one out with Teresa Camper that was recorded a little while ago. That one came out, and I've got others that have been recorded already that will come out in a regular sequence going forwards. And so it's something I want to get back into. I've missed doing them. I've had my head in other things for a while, but I feel like now I've got the kind of headspace and the workspace to get these done again, and I hope you appreciate them. And if you do, like and subscribe, etc., all the usual YouTube stuff. If you're listening to this on a podcast, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. If it isn't on your favorite podcast platform, if you want it on a podcast platform that it isn't on, because there's more and more podcast platforms all the time, so if you want this, or if you want the audio only of this on a platform that isn't on already, like for example the Paul Kirtley podcast wasn't on Spotify, and so people kept pestering me in a good way to get it on Spotify, and I did. So anything like that, just tell me and I'll do my best. They're all available on SoundCloud as well. I put both the Paul Kirtley podcast and Ask Paul Kirtley's on my SoundCloud account, and you can just listen to them and download them from there as well. So there's loads and loads of ways of consuming this and the podcast. I'll continue to put new material on my blog as well, long form articles and shorter articles. I've got a number of things coming out there because again, I've missed doing that as much as I was doing at one point. It all got a little bit too much at one point, particularly when I was also writing a book and managing the business through COVID and all this kind of stuff. I had to put a few things on hold for a while. But now here we are back again doing these. What else can I say? Buy the book, please. Took me a long time to write it. Books are such a bargain. You get so much information for so little money, and you can use it over and over and over and over and over again, or you can use it as much as you want and then give it to somebody else and they can use it over and over and over and over again. Books are a bargain. They're fantastic. They're nice to hold. They're nice to look at. They are one of the ways that as a species we keep hold of our knowledge. Share books, not just my book, share books with people, share your favourite books with people, gift books, read books, and make the world a better place in that way. That's the end of my ramble for today. If you don't like the rambles, there are 5 billion, million, trillion other YouTube channels elsewhere. That's all. See you soon. Bye.